I don't know what this is. These things, I guess they're wood, the little medallions.
Yeah, they are. It's a nice spot. Matthew picked a good spot.
Okay, so we're gonna go back a little bit because it kind of cut off short about how your brother was before the war.
Yeah.
So what about the bird? Did you get the?
No.
Oh, you didn't get that.
Where did I leave off? Did I say he was a marksman?
Yeah, you can start with the marksman story and then maybe go into the crow story.
Into the what?
The crow.
The crow's.
Oh, okay.
It got cut off.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then where should she start? Oh, marksman?
Okay.
Okay. What kind of boy he was?
I didn't set the scene that his name was Kenner, did I, at the beginning?
Yeah, that would be great if you could introduce him too.
Yeah. My brother Kenneth, yeah. And I think I'll spell it.
Okay. Yeah.
Because people think it's Kenneth.
Whenever you're ready.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. My brother Kenneth, Kennard, was only 7 years old when our father died. So shortly after that, my father died in July, and my mother thought it might be nice if he went to camp with some of the other boys in the neighborhood, and he went to camp, but...
Cut it. Go start.
Okay. My brother Kennard, Kennard, was only 7 years old when my father died on July 6th in 1929. And shortly after that, that summer, I guess in August, he went to camp with some of the neighborhood boys, but he wasn't very happy there, and so we all drove up to Vermont where the camp was and got him because they had said that he cried a lot, and naturally he was crying for his daddy. So, but then the following summer he asked if he could go back to the camp, and he went. From then on he became known as an excellent marksman at the camp, and he ended up as a camp counselor in later years, in his teen years, and he had the medals for the best marksman at the camp, but his shooting ability was just as a sport only. Never shot an animal, it was just, as I say, a sport. So when I think about it, what he must have gone through, very traumatic experience to have to change that marksmanship into wartime marksmanship and basic training. But in between there, that's to prove how much he hated guns. I won't say the guns themselves, but what the guns could do. We had a peach tree in the backyard, and my aunt said there was a crow that was getting most of the peaches. She asked Kenneth, since he was such a good marksman, to please shoot the crow. So my brother did. He was about maybe 14 years old then. He shot the crow, bango, and right away fell down out of the tree. But when he saw what he had done, he said to my aunt, "Please don't ever ask me to shoot anything again." So I just wanted to set the scene to let you all know what a gentle man Kenneth grew up to be and was. And so I guess now to go back to the years, this gentle man that had to go through D-Day and several battles, including the battle in which he was taken prisoner. And taken prisoner, his experience at the prison camp was interesting in this respect. It was towards the end of the war, and when he was taken into the prison camp, there already were quite a few French boys there that evidently had been taken prisoner in the early days of the war when Germany was had Paris, had control of France. And he said that the Frenchmen were so clever that they had somehow managed to build a little shortwave radio that they kept under the boards of the floor. And they say they could keep track of pretty much they knew what was going on, and they made it out of little pieces of things that they got in the Red Cross packages, and I guess pieces of tinfoil. I really don't know, but it was very clever. And but his experience in the prison camp was that they lived on mostly potato peeling soup, and not very much. And that at the beginning, when he was first there, the officers or the guards were mostly SS troopers, but they all were taken away, I guess, to fight in the German army. And when towards the end of his stay at the prison camp, they were older men, and some like in their 50s, and maybe the way he talked, maybe 50, 60 years old, because the other men were all at the front trying to save Germany from. And he talked about, it was Christmas, so it must have been Christmas of 1944, because the war was over in 45. So this had to be Christmas of 44. He said that the boys, they were singing Christmas carols, and one of the guards, who was an older man, walked by them and without looking at them, reached in his pocket, and he had some hard candy that he had evidently gotten somewhere, and he threw it to the boys. So they had a little bit of hard candy from the prison card, and he thought then that all the Germans didn't want to be where they were either. He said that, for instance, that God showed his regard for human nature. And so towards the end of the war, and the Russian army was approaching, coming east, and was close to the German border, when he and these older men were in charge of the prison, and he and two other boys decided that there was some kind of a skirmish in the front of the camp. I don't know what to call it other than a skirmish, whether somebody else had tried to escape. But anyhow, there was a skirmish, and Kenneth and two other boys got out of the back of the camp, and they walked and escaped, and walked, they had to be walking east. Whether they had to cross the Oder River or not, I don't know, but they got into Poland and walked across Poland, mostly at night. And he said the Polish underground helped them, that the men wore something under their lapel, and if it was a member of the underground, he would just turn his lapel over and show so the boys were, so Kenneth and these two knew whether they were friends or not, and would point to where to go next. And Kenneth said they approached one farm, and they were going to go in the barn and hide. And that night, they were the husband and the wife, the original owners evidently of the farm, were seen hanging. They had hung themselves to death, evidently. How long they had been there, he didn't know. But he had experiences like that. And another time, he said, they were so hungry, they had the soap with them that they had in the Red Cross packages, and they even ate some of the soap, I guess for the lard or whatever. And that they found a little baby or piglet running around in one of the farms. They grabbed it, and they said they were going to cook it, but they were too hungry, they couldn't wait. They hardly cooked it when they ate the piglet. But anyhow, then they progressed through Poland, and they went along pretty much along the Russian lines. The Russians were coming west and they were going east, and they got to the supply line for the Russian army, and they walked down and got into Italy, walking. By the time they got to Italy, they were pretty emaciated. In fact, one of the boys died on the way somewhere in Poland. He didn't make it out of Poland, and then there were two of them. So the two boys, Kenneth and his companion, ended up in a hospital army hospital in Italy, and the boys were kept there a couple of weeks, and those two boys were then flown across the ocean to Miami. Now in those days, nobody flew except officers, so I guess because they were prisoners of war, they were flown back to the States and then put on a train to go to Washington, D.C. to be debriefed, to tell their story. But on the way between Miami and Washington, someplace in Georgia, the one boy either fell off the train or jumped off the train, I don't know. And I can't say for sure, but he was killed. So then only Kenneth was left to go to Washington. And we had a call. I guess Kenneth was whether he was in Miami at that time or Washington. We knew that, no, he called us from Washington because then he knew exactly when he would be home, what day. And he told us they'd be home on such and such a day, and that we could meet him, very definitely, not to come into the train station in New York, to meet him at the ferry boat when it came in at St. George, Staten Island, and not where the people got off the boat, which was upstairs in the ferry boat, but downstairs where the automobiles and trucks were, because he didn't want to be with the people. He knew it would be an emotional scene. So it was my mother and my, not my husband, but my aunt and uncle, myself, because it was during the week and Rudy had to work. And so we stood on land and watched the ferry boat come in, and Kenneth was standing in the front, and just a skinny, tall man, and his legs were so thin in his heavy GI boots or shoes, whatever they were. They looked like spindles coming out of the shoes. And it was a very emotional homecoming. And that night, it had to be a Friday because then my husband, we were living in Philadelphia, so he came up from his office in Westinghouse office in Philadelphia, and we all sat up, had dinner, then we all sat up until the wee hours of morning, and maybe it was almost daylight, and Kenneth told the whole story of his stay in the war amidst tears and sobbing. When he finished, and he said, "Don't ever ask me anything about the war again." And nobody ever did. And I remember, what I remember is what I remember. But I did have to go. I remember part of it. I had my Lois with me, and she was just, I think, 2, and I had to go upstairs and put her to bed, so I missed a little bit of it. I think the part where they were going through France, I don't remember that part of the story. And I have a feeling that that's when I was upstairs putting Lois to bed. And, but then after that, Kenneth was a nervous wreck. They didn't have a word for it then. And if he heard a plane, he'd jump out of bed and go under the bed, and he couldn't seem to focus to do anything. And so I had to go home. After about a week, I went home with Lois, and then my mother and aunt said that they couldn't seem to give him the right, nothing was right. He was just so on edge and nervous, and so they thought maybe if he had a project, maybe he could paint the porch furniture. So my aunt got him the paintbrush and paint and everything, and after about 20 minutes of that, he took the paintbrush and just threw it in the yard. That was that. And so evidently, people realized that he wasn't so well, and he went to Lake, how he got there I don't know, but he went to Lake Placid, New York, where they had R&R for the soldiers. They took the Lake Placid Club. That's where they had the Olympics at one time. It was in the Adirondack Mountains. And they took the whole hotel, and it was filled with boys that were emotionally disturbed. But Kenneth was not as bad as some of the other boys, so he was made an MP there. In other words, he was there, but he wasn't there. And so he had a job to do, and that was he had to go in town, in the town of Lake Placid, at a certain time at night, say 9 o'clock at night, make sure that there weren't any stragglers, that all the boys were back, and I guess in this R&R place or hospital, I don't know what they called it, and that was his duty there. But I guess at the same time, he was undergoing some kind of treatment. And when that was over, he came home, and we thought he should go back to school, to Penn State, and then we found out that they wouldn't take him because his grades weren't high enough. There were so many GIs coming home that wanted to use the GI plan to go to college that those that had started had to have high grades in order to get back in. And Kenneth he was not the kind of a student that ever achieved very highly. He just always made it, and that satisfied him. It was always, he could have done better, but he never did. He always used to say, if 75 passes, that's fine with me. So anyhow, when I found out that they wouldn't take my brother back, I was a graduate of Penn State, my husband was a graduate of Penn State, I sat down and I wrote a letter to the Dean of Returning GIs. And he happened to be an English professor. Can't remember his name, but I know that I remember his wife well because she was a sorority sister of mine. And I wrote him a letter saying that it was his patriotic duty to allow my brother to return to school because there was no place for him at the time in society. That he was lost, but he wanted to go. He wanted to go back to Penn State, and fortunately, they did accept Kenneth, and that was what changed his life around. Because while he was there, he got, from getting just passing grades, he got 3s, which is top grade. He met a lovely girl by the name of Marigold Kinney, whose father was a professor at Penn State, and they fell in love, and she and both my brother and she got their masters together and in geography, and my brother became a professor, a geography professor, and ended up teaching at the University of Iowa and in the SUNY system of New York and Brockport, New York. That's what Marigold did for my brother, Kenneth, because he really truly was lost when the war was over, and he couldn't focus on anything. But by going back to school and meeting the right person, and the right family, the Kinney family, they took him in. Marigold was an only child. They took him in as a son, and he lived with them. It just changed his life around. And so to this day, I thank dear Marigold for saving my brother. So that's it. The story ended happily in that respect. But I must say this: my brother never spoke of the war again, and we never asked him any questions about it, except that one time his daughters Debbie and Lori asked him. They had a project in school where they were asked to write something about either their father's experiences or something about a war. And so they innocently said, "Daddy, you can help us." And he said to them very gruffly, I don't want to speak about the war." And so they knew enough that they never did. And so Kenneth died with the secrets, many secrets of World War II in his heart. And he told me, "Sis, if I don't have a little bit to drink before I go to bed," he used to have a shot of vodka, he said, "I could never sleep." Now, whether he did that all the time he was teaching or not, but in his later years, after Marigold passed away, and he spent some years with me, he said that to me, that his dreams were always going back to World War II. But he did surmount it. Some of the boys did and some never did. And so we're fortunate in that respect that he did. And I'd like to go back and think if there's anything that I forgot, because I have forgotten. But it isn't. It's what I call a happy hardness, because I want you all to know about it. And I feel so badly that I had to go upstairs, and it was just now that I thought that would have been the part of when, because he talked about that he got up the wall or the cliff.
The cliff.
But after that, because they were, just from history, I know there were the parachute men, they would infer, they were hanging from trees, they were dead bodies and everything. So, but that, I don't remember his story about that, and that must have been when I was upstairs with
Lois.
With Lois, putting her to bed. Yeah.
I just remember.
And see, Rudy died, and now before he might have remembered part of it. And the interesting thing is, cousin. We had only one male cousin, and that was Raymond, and he was in the Navy during the war. But he was in the Navy. He sailed up to Vladivostok. No, I think he was even flown with some boys, naval boys, or got up to Vladivostok, Russia. In those days, Vladivostok, that was like
in the middle of nowhere.
Nowhere.
Yeah.
He spent the whole time of the war in Vladivostok. He was a weatherman.
Oh, okay, that's right.
And he wrote all about the weather, and it was in Vladivostok, that weather station, that determined what, they knew the weather patterns like for the whole Europe, and from there they decided what day Eisenhower was going to have D-Day.
Oh, interesting.
And that Raymond said to think that he was in on the workings of that, because Kenneth and Raymond were close.
They were close. I know.
And after the war, they used to talk.
Oh, they would talk. The two
They
of them.
would talk.
Because they would understand each other, because they shared that,
And because Raymond's experiences were nothing but damn cold it was.
Yeah, he wasn't.
And dreary and damn cold.
But I always wondered about. But did you ever find out? Okay, the two boys that Dad was with. There was never any contact with their families and Dad ever after that? I always thought that was like something that.
That would be something
I don't know how you would find that out. But
I went back to Philadelphia then.
Because, right, yeah.
Because I had a family. I had a husband, Rudy, working. And Aunt Jim and Uncle Chappie and Mother were there. And one of the experiences was, I remember they went to church. And Mother and Aunt Jim said to the priest afterwards that they prayed Kenneth, he became a prisoner of war, and that they prayed him out of the war. And afterwards, Kenneth was very angry at that because he said, other mothers prayed too, period, you know? And my mother said, she and Aunt Jim innocently said that, but they shut up knowing, you know, and that's all he said, very gruffly. Other mothers prayed too. And so, yeah. But no, what happened to those boys? And I often think, I wonder if maybe on that train, maybe they had a few drinks coming up. Maybe he fell off, or whether he jumped off. I don't know. I don't know that story. Now that could be, it must be in the history of the War Department someplace. Returning prisoners of war. And Kevin is interested, he delved into some of it. And maybe you could all delve into that now that everything is out, you know, that you might be able to find out. Because I do remember they were in hospital in Italy. And from Italy they went to Miami, and that they were flown to Miami, which was unique. Because everyone went by ship. I don't know the experience of Kenneth. I don't know what ship he was on either when he went over. There were lots of transport ships. I don't know exactly where he left from. So there's a lot of it that I don't know. That must be in the history books.